Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is involvement in the sport. Involvement with the sport and how that affects spectators. So we're talking about involvement from a sense of maybe they participated in it, maybe they are fans of the sport, and so in some way they are interacting with the sport in some way. So I'm not talking about a specific brand, but the sport itself. So when we look at involvement, there are three basic types, and I'll give you the definitions here in a second. But the three basic types of involvement are behavioral, enduring, and situational involvement. The first of these is the outcome variable, and if you're into statistics, it's essentially what we're trying to get to. In other words, get them to do something. So this behavioral involvement is defined as the degree to which a person views himself or herself to be engaged in product-related activities. The key to this definition is product-related activities. And so these are purchases of the 3 M's. In other words, it's the merchandise, the meeting, and the media. And so these are the outcome variable, the things we do. The second one is enduring involvement, and this is, if you're going to underline one as being the foundation of all types of involvement, this is it. It's enduring involvement. This is the unobservable state of continued motivation, arousal, or interest toward a product, toward a recreational activity or associated product. And so the key words here is that it's unobservable state of continued motivation. It's not something that you can put your finger on. It's the underlying reason for why people do things. I'm a fan because I've always been a fan. Well, why is that? Well, I can't exactly put my finger on it, but I know that I'm a fan. And so this enduring involvement is that over a long period of time, we have this interest toward this activity or this sport, and that's what drives us to be fans. The last one is situational involvement, and this is, again, goes back to our other discussions of situational. It's temporary in nature, in that it could be both good and bad, but it is something that's not going to last that long. It's different than enduring involvement. It's actually the opposite. And so this would be being temporarily interested in an activity. So thing that comes to mind more in more recent years has been the idea of Quidditch. It's starting to take off, but SFA has its own Quidditch team now. Last statistics I saw, there were over 100,000 different people who across the United States that competed in Quidditch. I'm sure that number is a lot greater now. I would say that Quidditch is probably not a situational influence, but at one time people considered it to be, in that it was something that was interesting, was unique. I've been saying for a while that CrossFit was going to be situational. I was wrong with that. It's become mainstream. But things that would make it popular would be celebrity endorsements of activities, different things that would cause people to want to do it more often. They could also be the opposite. So right now in American football, one of the issues is concussions, and concussions in youth sport. It's changing the game and the way it's played. Is it going to be situational, this idea of concussion protocols and ensuring safety of children, or are we going to change the mentality of the game or how the game is played? Those are all questions that are being asked. But all that to be said is there are situational factors that influence us. So if we look at this model, we're looking at, on the very far left is the behavioral, enduring, and situational involvement. You can see the unobservable state, that foundation, both impacts our situational and our behavioral involvement. And all of that leads to this essentially gap between our satisfaction, and that is the brand or team level. This is where team identification comes in. Let's say the enduring involvement is I have enduring involvement for American football, and my outcome, my behavior would be becoming a fan of that team, and that is influenced by a team's winning, something that may be temporary. You call those bandwagon fans. That leads to an identification or team ID. That team ID then leads to some sort of response. So if we look at this, let me move this over so you can see it a little better. Hopefully it doesn't ruin the video. But essentially, sports marketers can increase their fans' enduring involvement, again, that unobservable state of arousal that will last over time, with the sport by increasing fans' identification. So there's a lot of ways to do this. This is what our research shows us. So one way is increasing our opportunities for participation in that sport. So we start to see teams sponsor the organizations start to sponsor more local youth teams or adult leagues. A good example of this is in Major League Soccer. MLS has, most teams have some sort of developmental league in which they sponsor and have a team or a series of teams that are named after the club. Thing comes to mind because I'm from Fort Worth. FC Dallas has a developmental league in which youth play in all the way up until they're in college, essentially. And these are typically more elite. They also have some recreational leagues and things like that. So get them opportunities to play the sport, get into teams or leagues, offer clinics. Another way is to provide information about the game itself. A lot of people don't want to watch the game if you don't know how to play it. I would venture to say most people watching this video probably don't know much about cricket. So if you're trying to do that, give your fans or potential fans the opportunity to learn more about it. At the games themselves, announcing rule changes or putting videos together or in pamphlets that you're handing out at the game, those types of things. Another one's provide complete game and player information. People want to know who's out there on the field, and so it's important for them to know that. This isn't the handouts during halftime, handouts and game bulletins introducing the player by giving personal information, so where they're from, what their major may be, that kind of stuff. And then we also know that facilitating media exchange. More news outlets cover our sport, the more likely people are going to be interested in it. And so all of that's important. So we know involvement in the sport impacts the spectator. Let's talk about the different types of spectators. So this one's pretty simple. There's two different ways you can look at spectators. One is the spectator who attends the event. Now that person, depending on the sport, can be completely different than the second person, who is the spectator who consumed the sporting event through some sort of medium. That would be television broadcast, online broadband media. So for example, you would say somebody who wants to go to an NFL game probably has a higher disposable income than someone who would want to go to a minor league baseball game. It's a lot more expensive, partially due to the popularity of the sport, but also because of the number of games that it played. And so if we know that spectators going to an NFL game may be completely different than spectators who are watching the game at home, we have to market to them differently and understand their behaviors differently. That may not be the case in others. So the National Pro Fast Pitch League has a team in Dallas and opening up one in Houston soon. Their fans go to the game more than they watch on television. And so the behaviors are different, and so you have to understand that. These factors also that influence this attendance, we can see a variety. So the fan motivation factors we talked about earlier, we'll talk about in a little bit. Game attractiveness, so who the opponent is, whether they have the spending power, the economic factors that impact that, who else is playing a game that night, or other types of events that are going on, demographic variables, stadium factors, which we'll talk about later, the value of the sport to the community, the sport's involvement, or the fans' involvement in the sport, and then their identification. So last thing we'll talk about is the fan motivation or the identification. This we're specifically talking about their motivation to be a fan of that brand. And so is defined as the level of interest in or the importance of sport to the consumers. And so we look at fan motivation, we can see that there's different stages or variations to that, starting with self-interest, moving our way up to affiliation. Self-esteem, moving our way up to affiliation. Self-esteem obviously is part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as you can see, we move ourselves up that ladder to the self-actualization. Somebody may do it for purposes of building up their own mentality. Others, or self-esteem. Others might do it to try to divert their troubles, meaning they're trying to get away from the problems in their life, need a place to go. Maybe it's for entertainment factor. They want to be entertained and on the edge of their seat. Others might do it because being on the edge of the seat is a stressful thing, and not knowing the outcome of the game, that's a good stress. That's called eustress, or the affiliation with the team or people that are like that. All of these are fan motivational factors. And then the last term is the fan identification. It's the personal commitment or the emotional involvement somebody has with the sport organization. And so we look at the different types of fan identification. It's levels. So we start at the bottom, low identification. Low identification is those people who just go because they want to be around their friends. They may not care much about the sport at all, but I feel like I had a good time last time. So it's enjoying camaraderie. They show up because they give away a bobblehead or a backpack or something fun or exciting, those incentives. Somebody who's medium identification would be short term. So maybe they're fans because the team's doing well, or they may be a fan of a single player. That is affected oftentimes by the team or the player not doing well, and so they may not come. And then the highest identification is those that are invested financially. They buy season tickets, come to a lot of games, they buy jerseys, they do all of the 3 M's that we talked about before. They go to away games as well as home games, and they've been fans for a long time. Typically, we want to move our fans up this identification ladder by providing value to the purchases we have.